It was the cat that finally made me say something. Not the job, not the lies, not even the ominous envelope hidden under the mattress. It was the stupid, orange, half-blind, three-legged cat named Meatball. You see, my best friend, Gabe, wasn't exactly known for making the wisest choices. He wasn't irresponsible, just impulsive. Like the time he decided to learn woodworking by building a bookshelf directly onto the wall of our rental apartment. Or the time he tried to fix my laptop with duct tape and leftover parts from his Nintendo. I usually let it slide because, hey, that's just Gabe. But this time was different. It started 3 months ago when Gabe lost his job. He didn't tell me at first, of course. I figured it out when I came home early one day and found him sitting on the couch in his boxers, eating cereal straight from the box. Gabe, the guy who ironed his shirts even on casual Fridays, wasn't the type to lounge around like a frat boy unless something was seriously wrong. Shouldn't you be at work? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Lunch break, he said, shoving a handful of Cheerios into his mouth. At 2 in the afternoon? Late lunch, he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. I let it go, but I started paying attention after that. I noticed the unopened mail piling up on the counter, the way he dodged questions about work, the nervous energy that seemed to cling to him like static. Finally, after 2 weeks of watching him unravel, I cornered him. Okay, spill, I said. What's going on? Gabe sighed and sank into the couch like a deflated balloon. I got laid off. They cut my whole department. Why didn't you tell me? I don't know, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I guess I didn't want you to worry, or think I couldn't handle it. I wanted to shake him. Gabe, you're my best friend. I'd rather know what's going on than watch you spiral into a walking PSA for depression. He chuckled weakly. I'm fine. Really. I've got some stuff lined up. It's under control. Except it wasn't. Weeks turned into months, and Gabe's stuff never materialized. He stopped taking my calls when I tried to check in, started spending more time out of the apartment, and came back with weird things. A karaoke machine, a stack of vintage comics, and, finally, Meatball. When I walked into the living room that night and saw the scruffy little feline perched on the couch like he owned the place, I nearly lost it. Gabe, I said slowly, where did this cat come from? He looked up from the floor, where he was assembling what appeared to be a tiny set of stairs. Oh hey, this is Meatball. Isn't he great? That's not an answer. He scratched the back of his head. Well, I was at this animal shelter, and he was in the corner, all sad and stuff, and they said nobody wanted him because of his, He gestured vaguely at Meatball's missing leg. So you adopted him? Yeah. I mean, look at him. He's a survivor. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Gabe, you don't have a job. You don't have an income. How are you going to afford to take care of a cat? I'll figure it out, he said, grinning like this was some quirky sitcom subplot. But it wasn't funny. It was frustrating. And for the first time in years, I felt something crack between us. The final straw came 2 nights later. I was cleaning up after dinner when I accidentally knocked over his gym bag. Out spilled a stack of unopened letters, all marked with the same logo, a debt collection agency. I stared at them, my heart sinking. This wasn't just about Gabe being impulsive or irresponsible. This was serious. I confronted him the next morning. Gabe, we need to talk. Oh, he said, trying to make a joke out of it. That's your serious voice. I found the letters, I said bluntly, from the collectors. What's going on? His face fell, and for a moment, he looked like a little kid caught stealing candy. It's nothing. I'll handle it. No, I said firmly. You've been saying that for months, and things are only getting worse. You're in over your head, and it's time to stop pretending you've got it under control. He crossed his arms defensively. What do you want me to do, huh? Admit that I screwed up? That I'm a failure? You think I don't already feel like crap every time I look in the mirror? This isn't about failure, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is about fixing things before they get worse. You need to call these people. Work out a payment plan. Get help. I don't need help, he snapped. What I need is for you to get off my back. I'm not trying to be a jerk, I said. But this is my life too. If you go under, it's not just you. It's us. The rent, the bills, all of it. I'm trying to save both of us here. He glared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You don't get it. You've always had everything together. You don't know what it's like to feel like you're drowning. I don't have it together, I said quietly. But I know drowning doesn't stop just because you ignore it. He didn't say anything, just grabbed his coat and stormed out. That was 3 weeks ago. Gabe hasn't come back, and I haven't heard from him. I know I pushed too hard, but what else could I have done? Let him sink deeper into denial? Let him ruin both of us? I miss him, and I hate that things ended like this. But was I wrong for trying to help? AITA? The clock in the corner of the room stopped at exactly midnight. Not the digital one on my phone or the sleek little smartwatch on my wrist, but the ancient wooden one, the kind with a pendulum that ticks in a way you don't notice until it stops. It wasn't my clock. It came with the house, an unsettlingly pristine antique that the realtor had called charming. But as the silence pressed down on me, I was no longer sure if charming was the right word. I was in the study, the kind of room that felt wrong to call anything else. It wasn't a den or an office. It was a study, with bookshelves that reached the ceiling and a massive desk that seemed more suited for plotting empires than answering emails. The rest of the house still smelled faintly of fresh paint and uncertainty, but this room had its own aroma. Old paper, leather, and something faintly metallic, like blood. I hadn't planned on buying the house. I'd been walking by it for years, the way you walk by something you've decided doesn't belong to the real world. It was always just there, sitting at the edge of the block like a bruise no one talked about. But then the sign went up, a gaudy modern for sale sign that clashed with the house's Gothic aesthetic, and before I knew it, I was holding the keys, wondering how a motivated seller had talked me into the most impulsive purchase of my life. The first week had been uneventful. The pipes groaned, the floors creaked, and the light switches had a maddening tendency to work only when they felt like it. But nothing about it felt sinister. Not until the clock stopped. I was halfway through an email when I noticed. The ticking had been a faint, rhythmic background noise, the kind you don't realize you're hearing until it's gone. I glanced up, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The pendulum was still, its brass surface catching the dim light in a way that made it seem almost alive. I frowned, standing to inspect it. The clock face was blank. No numbers, no hands, just a smooth, polished surface where the time should have been. My stomach tightened. That wasn't how it had looked before. Was it? Okay, I muttered to myself, my voice too loud in the silence. This is fine. You're overtired, and the clock is weird. It's a weird clock. As if in response, the air in the room shifted. It wasn't a breeze. None of the windows were open, but something changed. The air felt heavier, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm. The bookshelves groaned, the sound deep and resonant, and for a split second, I could have sworn the shadows in the room moved. That was when I heard the knock. Not at the front door, where knocks are supposed to happen, but from inside the study. 3 sharp raps, coming from the wall behind the desk. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The knock came again, slower this time, like it knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Hello?" I said, my voice breaking on the second syllable. The wall answered with a soft creak, the kind of sound wood makes when it's settling. But this wood wasn't settling. It was shifting. The paneling behind the desk rippled, and suddenly a seam appeared, a faint line that hadn't been there a moment ago. Before I could think better of it, I reached out and pressed my hand against the seam. It gave way, and the wall swung open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. I stared at it, every nerve in my body screaming to close the door and burn the house down. But there was something else, a pull, faint but insistent, like the staircase itself was beckoning me. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and started down. The steps were stone, worn smooth in a way that suggested centuries of use. The air grew colder the farther I descended, and the metallic smell intensified, sharp and acrid. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a circular chamber, its walls lined with mirrors. Each mirror was slightly different, some cracked, others clouded with age, but they all reflected the same thing. Me, standing in a room that shouldn't exist. In the center of the chamber was a table, and on the table sat a single object, a key. It was ornate, its handle twisted into a pattern that seemed to shift when I looked at it too long. Next to the key was a note, written in a spidery hand that felt both familiar and alien. For the one who found it, choose carefully. I picked up the key, its weight solid and cold in my hand. As I turned it over, the mirrors flickered. One by one, they stopped reflecting the room. Instead, they showed moments, scenes from my life, playing out like snippets of a film. There was me at 10, hiding a broken vase behind my back. Me at 23, standing at the altar with Sarah, who would leave 6 years later with a note that read, "It's not you, it's me." Me at 30, sitting in a hospital waiting room, the doctor's words echoing in my head, "We did everything we could." And then there was something else, a reflection that wasn't a memory. It showed me, standing in a different room, holding the same key. But this version of me wasn't alone. Beside me was a woman, her face shadowed, her features indistinct, but I could feel the warmth of her presence through the glass. It was a moment that hadn't happened yet, or maybe it had happened somewhere else. The key grew warmer in my hand, almost pulsing with an unspoken question. Choose, it seemed to say. Rewrite or remember. I stared at the mirrors, at the life I'd lived and the one I might have, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than regret. I felt hope. The ship had been drifting for weeks, a black speck swallowed by an endless void. Its engines had long since gone silent, leaving only the faint hum of the life support system to break the oppressive quiet. On board, Captain Reese Phelan sat in the command chair, staring out at the vast emptiness of space through the cracked glass of the viewport. His crew was gone, every last one of them, and the weight of their absence pressed down on him like a physical thing. The Sable Ark was a ghost ship now, though the haunting hadn't come from anything as benign as restless spirits. Reese had seen it happen, watched helplessly as something moved through his ship, taking his crew one by one. It had no form that he could comprehend, no face he could fight. It was simply there, a flicker of shadow in the corner of his eye, a whisper in the static of the comms, and then a scream. He closed his eyes, running a hand through his unkempt hair. His fingers lingered on the stubble of his jaw, a reminder that he hadn't shaved in days. Or was it weeks? Time didn't seem to mean much anymore. He had stopped keeping track after the last cry for help faded into silence. A soft beep startled him from his thoughts. The proximity alarm. Reese sat up, his heart pounding. The radar display flickered to life, showing a single blip on the screen, a ship. It was close, drifting toward him like a lost whale in an ocean of nothing. He grabbed the comms mic, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "This is Captain Reese Phelan of the freighter Sable Ark. Identify yourself." Static crackled in response, followed by a voice. "This is the vessel Peregrine Dawn. We received your distress signal. Are you alone?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Reese hesitated, his grip tightening on the mic. He had sent no distress signal. "No," he lied. "My crew is with me." The silence that followed was worse than static. Then the voice returned, softer this time. "We're boarding. Don't move." The connection cut off abruptly, and Reese stared at the console, his mind racing. Whoever they were, they had no idea what they were walking into. Moments later, the Peregrine Dawn docked with the Sable Ark, the faint shudder reverberating through the hull. Reese rose from his seat, his legs unsteady, and grabbed the pistol from the holster on his belt. It was a small comfort, but comfort all the same. The airlock hissed as it opened, revealing a team of 3 figures in sleek, black suits. Their faces were obscured by helmets, their visors glowing faintly in the dim light. The one in the lead raised a hand in greeting. "Captain Phelan?" the figure asked, their voice distorted by the helmet's modulator. Reese nodded, keeping his gun at his side. "You shouldn't have come here." The figure tilted their head. "You're lucky we did. Your ship signal has been bouncing through the sector for weeks. What happened here?" Reese hesitated, his gaze shifting to the shadows in the corner of the room. "It's not safe." The lead figure took a step forward, their hand resting on the weapon strapped to their thigh. "Not safe for who?" Before Reese could answer, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, one of the figures was gone. Reese froze. "Do you see now?" he said, his voice trembling. "It's already started." The remaining two figures exchanged glances. "Where's Tova?" one of them asked, panic creeping into their tone. "She's gone," Reese said. "You need to leave. Now." The lead figure ignored him, tapping a command into their wrist-mounted console. "Tova, report in. Do you copy?" Only static replied. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Reese felt it, the weight of something unseen, its presence pressing against the edges of his mind. He gripped his gun tighter, his knuckles white. "You can't fight it," he said. "It's not something you can shoot or reason with. It's not human." The second figure took a step back, their movements jerky. "Captain, what the hell is he talking about?" The lead figure didn't answer. Instead, they turned to Reese, their visor reflecting his own terrified face. "You knew this was here. Why didn't you warn us?" "I did," Reese snapped, "but you wouldn't have believed me." The air grew colder, frost creeping along the edges of the consoles. The lights flickered again, then died, plunging the ship into total darkness. Reese heard a scream, high, raw, and cut short. When the emergency lights blinked on, only the lead figure remained, their weapon drawn. "It's too late," Reese said, his voice hollow. "You're not leaving this ship." The lead figure turned to him, their movements frantic. "What is it? What are we dealing with?" Reese opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. How could he describe something that defied understanding? All he could do was shake his head. The figure stepped closer, their visor inches from Reese's face. "If we're going to die here, you owe me an explanation." "It's not from here," Reese said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's old. Hungry. It doesn't kill. It consumes." The figure staggered back, their breaths audible even through the helmet. The shadows around them seemed to shift, coiling like smoke. Reese knew what was coming, but there was no point in warning them. It was already too late. The last figure disappeared without a sound, leaving Reese alone once more. He sank to the floor, his gun slipping from his hand. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. He stared into the darkness, waiting for the inevitable. A voice broke the silence, soft and familiar. "Why do you fight it, Captain?" Reese didn't respond. The voice wasn't real. It couldn't be real. "You could join them," it said. "It's painless, beautiful, even." Reese closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." The darkness around him seemed to shudder, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw the faint outline of faces. His crew, the boarding party, all staring at him with hollow, glowing eyes. And then the shadows closed in. When Isla first pitched the idea, I thought she was kidding. We were sitting in our favorite diner, splitting a plate of curly fries and lamenting the state of our lives, as we often did. "Let's make a documentary," she said, dipping a fry into ketchup with far too much casual confidence. "Yeah, sure," I said, laughing. "And let's also win an Oscar while we're at it." "No, I'm serious," she said, leaning forward. Her dark eyes were alive with that dangerous kind of spark that usually preceded one of her harebrained schemes. A real documentary, about something weird and niche, like haunted objects. Haunted objects? I raised an eyebrow. "Think about it," she said. "Every small town has at least one creepy doll locked in a glass case or a mirror that steals your soul. We could travel around, talk to the people who believe in this stuff, and make something awesome." I took a sip of my milkshake, considering it. On one hand, Isla's big ideas almost always ended in chaos. On the other hand, the thought of hitting the road with her and chasing ghost stories sounded kind of incredible. "All right," I said finally. "Let's do it." "Hell yes." Isla slapped the table so hard the fries jumped. "We're gonna make history." The first few weeks were like a fever dream. We bought a cheap second-hand camera, borrowed a mic from Isla's cousin, and dove headfirst into the world of haunted artifacts. Isla was a force of nature, calling museums, scouring Reddit forums, and charming small-town locals into spilling their spookiest stories. Meanwhile, I handled logistics, planning routes, budgeting our meager funds, and trying to keep Isla from buying every cursed trinket we came across. Our first stop was a dusty antique shop in Pennsylvania, where the owner swore up and down that a porcelain doll named Violet had whispered her name one night. We filmed her telling the story, complete with shaky reenactments and dramatic close-ups of Violet's cracked face. "This is gold," Isla whispered to me as we packed up. "We're gonna go viral." I smiled, caught up in her excitement. Yeah, viral for sure. But as the miles piled up, so did the tension. Isla had a vision for the documentary, something raw, creepy, and full of over-the-top flair. She wanted jump scares, ominous music, and spooky voiceovers. I, on the other hand, wanted something grounded. I thought the people were the story, their quirks, their belief systems, their passion for the unexplainable. "We're not making Paranormal Activity 8, I argued during one of our late-night editing sessions. "Exactly," Isla said, throwing her hands up. "We're making something better. People love drama, Jules. They don't want a TED Talk about ghost nerds." "It's not a TED Talk," I snapped. "It's a character study. We're supposed to be documenting, not fabricating." "It's called artistic license," she shot back. "Do you want people to actually watch this or not?" I didn't have an answer. I just went to bed, too exhausted to keep fighting. The tension only got worse. Isla started ignoring my input, deciding unilaterally which interviews to cut and which scenes to reshoot. She added fake creaking sounds to an old rocking chair that was supposedly cursed, and when I called her out on it, she rolled her eyes. "It's for the vibe," she said. "No one's going to care if it's 100% accurate." "I care," I said. "If we're not being honest, what's the point?" "The point is to make something good," she snapped. "Not bore people to death with your authenticity." I should have walked away then, but I didn't. I threw myself into the project, determined to salvage it in spite of Isla's antics. I started editing secretly at night, cutting out the fakery and leaning into the genuine moments. An old man crying as he talked about the watch that stopped the day his wife died. A teenager explaining how she felt seen by the ghost of a woman no one else believed in. It was beautiful, but it wasn't Isla's vision, and I knew it would piss her off. She found out, of course. One night, she walked in on me tweaking the sound levels on my version of the film and lost her mind. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, pointing at the screen. "Where's the fog overlay? The ominous music?" "I took it out," I said, trying to stay calm. "It didn't feel right." "Didn't feel right to you," she spat. "This isn't just your project, Jules. We're supposed to be a team." "A team?" I laughed bitterly. "Since when? You've steamrolled every idea I've had since day one." "That's because your ideas suck," she yelled. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. "Wow," I said, standing up. "Okay, if that's how you feel, maybe I should just stop helping." "Maybe you should," she said, her voice icy. We didn't talk for 3 days. The documentary sat untouched, a digital ghost haunting both our laptops. Finally, Isla broke the silence with a single text. "We need to finish it." I showed up at her door that night, ready to hash things out. We spent hours arguing over every little detail. What to keep, what to cut, how to balance her flair for drama with my insistence on truth. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but somehow, we found a middle ground. The finished product was messy and imperfect, but it was ours. We uploaded it to YouTube at midnight, our hearts pounding as we hit publish. The response was underwhelming. A few hundred views, a handful of comments, and one guy who called us hipster Scooby-Doo wannabes. But as Isla and I sat in our living room, laughing and cringing at the reviews, I realized something. We'd done it. Against all odds, we'd made something together. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd lost something along the way. The process had turned us into strangers, and I wasn't sure we'd ever fully get back to who we were before. So, now I'm left wondering, was it worth it? When my brother Ethan told me he was getting married, I wasn't surprised. He and Jessica had been together for years, and she was the kind of woman you just knew was going to end up in a bridal magazine one day. Organized, elegant, always pulling off some kind of Pinterest-level DIY project that would make Martha Stewart weep. She was perfect. And to be fair, so was the engagement ring. That's what this whole thing is about. The ring. A delicate, vintage piece Ethan had somehow unearthed from a local jeweler. It had a diamond that wasn't massive but sparkled like it had secrets to tell, set in platinum with this intricate, floral design curling around the band. I remember thinking it looked like something out of a period drama. Jessica loved it, naturally. She posted it on Instagram the day he proposed, and the picture racked up hundreds of likes in hours. It was also, unfortunately, a size too big. Jessica didn't mind. She said she'd get it resized soon, but until then, she kept it safely on a stand in her bedroom. The kind of thing you'd imagine being placed in a glass case in a museum. She didn't want to wear it and risk it slipping off before she could get it adjusted. Sensible, right? So, fast forward a month. Jessica asked me if I could swing by her place to pick up some decorations for her bridal shower. She and Ethan were out finalizing catering details, and I was happy to help. I'd been to her place plenty of times and knew exactly where she kept the key under the flower pot. It was a simple task. Harmless. What could possibly go wrong? I wasn't planning to touch the ring. Honestly, I didn't even remember it was there until I saw it, perched on the stand like some kind of sparkling beacon in the corner of her vanity. I wasn't going to touch it, until I did. In my defense, I just wanted to try it on. I wasn't doing anything weird. I just wanted to see what it felt like to wear something so delicate and expensive. My love life, to put it kindly, is a train wreck, so imagining myself as someone with a fairy tale engagement was a harmless little fantasy, right? I slid it on my finger and held my hand up to the light. It was beautiful. I felt beautiful. And then I sneezed. Now, sneezing isn't usually a big deal. But for some reason, in that moment, my body betrayed me. My hand jerked, and the ring flew off my finger like it was escaping a burning building. I watched, horrified, as it bounced once on the hardwood floor and then vanished. I froze. The kind of stillness you see in deer right before they get hit by a truck. The ring was gone. I dropped to my knees, my heart hammering in my chest, and started searching. Under the vanity, under the bed, behind the dresser. Nothing. The more I looked, the more panicked I became. My brain conjuring up every worst-case scenario imaginable. What if it had rolled into a vent? Or worse, what if I couldn't find it at all? Hours later, I was a sweaty, frantic mess. The ring was still missing, and I was running out of time. Jessica was due back soon, and there was no way I could explain this without looking like a complete idiot. That's when I had what I can only describe as the worst idea I've ever had in my life. I decided to buy a replacement. Hear me out. The ring wasn't that unique. Sure, it had its little vintage flourishes, but I figured I could find something close enough online and swap it out before she even noticed. I spent the next several hours scrolling through Etsy and eBay, burning through search terms like vintage platinum floral diamond ring. I even overnight one from a shop 3 states over that looked kind of similar, at least in the blurry photo. The replacement arrived the next morning. I held it up next to the pictures on Jessica's Instagram, comparing every detail. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough that I thought I might actually pull this off. I placed it on the stand, adjusted the angle, and stepped back, marveling at my genius. Problem solved. Crisis averted. Except not. Jessica called me 2 days later, her voice icy enough to give me frostbite through the phone. "Lila," she said, "did you touch my ring?" My stomach dropped. Why do you ask?" "Because the one on my stand isn't mine." I tried to play dumb. I tried to tell her she must have been mistaken, that maybe the jeweler had switched it out or something. But she wasn't buying it. Jessica has this terrifying ability to sniff out BS like a bloodhound. Within minutes, she'd gotten the whole story out of me. The sneeze, the search, the replacement. Everything. "You lost my engagement ring," she hissed. "And then you lied about it?" "I was going to fix it," I blurted. "I didn't want to ruin your wedding vibes." "Wedding vibes?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Do you have any idea how much that ring means to me? Ethan and I picked it out together. It's not just some piece of jewelry, it's sentimental." I tried apologizing, promising to replace the replacement with something better, to keep searching for the original. But Jessica wasn't having it. She hung up on me, and when I called Ethan to explain, he just sighed and said, "Lila, what the hell were you thinking?" Now, I've turned Jessica's place upside down 3 more times, and I still can't find the ring. She's told everyone what happened. Our parents, her friends, even the caterer. I've become the family pariah overnight. The replacement ring is still sitting on her vanity, like a silent accusation, and every time I see it, I feel a wave of fresh guilt. I know I screwed up, but I didn't mean to lose it, and I really thought I could fix things. So, tell me, AITA? The idea was simple. Bring my closest friends together for an unforgettable evening. An immersive murder mystery dinner I had spent 3 months crafting from scratch. This wasn't one of those boxed kits with pre-written scripts and cheesy clues. No, this was an intricately woven tale of betrayal and greed set in a 1920s speakeasy, complete with custom invitations, period costumes, and carefully designed clues. I was the host and game master, controlling the flow of the evening. I wanted everything to be perfect. The darkened dining room lit by flickering candlelight, the clink of cocktail glasses filled with gin martinis, and the lilting sound of jazz humming through the air. It was my chance to shine, not just as a party host but as a storyteller. Tonight wasn't just a game. It was my magnum opus. Everyone showed up on time, dressed to the nines. My best friend, Serena, looked stunning in her sequined flapper dress and feathered headband, her red lipstick as sharp as her tongue. She was playing the lounge singer, Ruby Valentine, a character I'd specifically written for her because I knew she'd bring the right mix of sass and drama. Then there was Jacob, my childhood friend, in a pinstripe suit that made him look like a baby-faced gangster. He was Johnny Black, a bootlegger with a chip on his shoulder. The rest of the cast rounded out nicely: a shady bartender, a corrupt cop, and a wealthy socialite with a dark secret. Everyone slipped seamlessly into their roles, and as the night began, the energy was electric. Everything was going perfectly until the announcement. It started innocently enough. We were midway through the main course: roast chicken with potatoes and green beans, served on mismatched vintage china I'd scoured thrift shops to find, when Serena clinked her glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" she said, standing up with the kind of presence that made heads turn even when she wasn't trying. "I know we're all here to solve a murder tonight, but I have some killer news of my own." The room chuckled at the pun. I didn't. My stomach tightened. "I wasn't planning on saying anything," Serena continued, placing a dramatic hand on her chest, "but I got cast as the lead in a new Netflix series." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Serena basked in it, flashing that perfect, dimpled smile that had charmed everyone since college. "That's amazing," someone exclaimed. "What's the show about?" "Wait, tell us about your audition," another chimed in. And just like that, the murder mystery dissolved into Serena's impromptu press conference. Everyone peppered her with questions, their excitement shifting the focus entirely. I tried to bring things back to the game by interjecting with a clue, but no one was paying attention. They were too busy gushing over Serena's big break. "Okay, so the show's about this small-town girl who," Serena started, but I cut her off with a forced laugh. "Well, if the starlet could take a break from her acceptance speech," I said, my tone just sharp enough to draw eyes back to me, "maybe we could figure out who killed Mr. Hargrave?" A few people chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension, but Serena just raised an eyebrow. "Sorry, didn't mean to steal the spotlight," she said, though her smirk suggested otherwise. The game limped along after that, but the energy was different. People were distracted, cracking jokes about how Serena would probably solve the case since she's such a star now. My carefully crafted plot twists fell flat, and when we finally revealed the killer, the reaction was lukewarm at best. After dinner, as people mingled with cocktails, I found Serena perched on the couch, recounting the details of her audition to a rapt audience. My frustration bubbled over. "Serena," I said, crossing the room and forcing a smile, "can I talk to you for a second?" "Sure," she said, standing up. "What's up?" I led her into the kitchen, away from the others, and turned to face her. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice low but heated. Serena blinked, genuinely confused. What was what? The announcement. I hissed. You hijacked the entire night. I spent months planning this, and you turned it into the Serena show. Couldn't you have waited until tomorrow? Her expression hardened. I didn't realize sharing good news was a crime. It's not about the news, I snapped. It's about timing. Tonight was supposed to be about the game, about everyone coming together to experience something I created. Instead, it became all about you. Serena folded her arms, her voice icy. I'm sorry my real-life accomplishment overshadowed your little dinner game. That little dinner game was supposed to be my moment. I shot back, my voice rising. You always do this, Serena. You can't stand not being the center of attention. Her eyes narrowed. And you can't stand that I'm actually doing something with my life. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, she stormed out, grabbing her coat and leaving without saying goodbye to anyone. The rest of the night was a blur. My friends tried to salvage the mood, cracking jokes and pouring more wine, but the magic was gone. By the time the last guest left, I was sitting alone in the dimly lit dining room, staring at the half-eaten dessert and wondering if I'd gone too far. Now, as I replay the argument in my mind, I can't shake the nagging question. Was I right to call her out, or did I ruin the night by making it about my bruised ego? AITA? When I first moved into my new place, the landlord's main pitch was the rooftop terrace. It's shared, he said, pointing upward like he'd just discovered the moon. But it's big enough for two households to enjoy without stepping on each other's toes. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. A shared rooftop sounded quaint, like the kind of thing where neighbors bond over sunsets and cocktails. And the view was stunning, city lights stretching into infinity. Then I met Sam, my upstairs neighbor, and things got complicated. Sam was tall and wiry, with a perpetual air of distracted brilliance. He introduced himself while holding a coffee mug that said Plant Daddy, explaining that he worked as a freelance graphic designer and unofficial horticulturist. His half of the terrace was immaculate. Potted succulents arranged in spirals, a vertical herb garden climbing the wall, and a sleek little seating area shaded by a pergola he'd built himself. My side, meanwhile, was barren except for the old grill the landlord had left behind and a single folding chair I'd bought at Walmart. You're welcome to use any of the plants, Sam had said, gesturing vaguely at the green explosion surrounding him. Just don't kill anything, yeah? I laughed and promised not to, even though I knew plants and I didn't exactly have a great track record. I figured I'd use the space for the occasional weekend drink and let Sam enjoy his botanic utopia. Easy enough, right? Wrong. The first issue came when I decided to throw a rooftop picnic with some friends. I texted Sam out of courtesy, letting him know we'd be up there around 6:30. He'd replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which I took as permission. What I didn't take as permission was the passive-aggressive sighing that started about 15 minutes into our gathering. I glanced over and saw Sam on his side of the terrace, carefully pruning his lavender bush while casting pointed glances at the empty wine bottles accumulating on my table. Is everything okay? I called over, trying to sound casual. Sam didn't look up. Fine, he said, in a tone that was decidedly not fine. Just didn't realize you'd be taking up so much space. I looked around. My friends were sitting in a neat cluster, laughing and chatting. One of them was leaning on the pergola, but otherwise, we were entirely on my side. We're not even touching your stuff, I said, confused. Sam shrugged, snipping a stem with exaggerated precision. It's more about the vibe. The vibe? I wanted to argue, but my friends were watching, so I swallowed my annoyance and ignored him. Still, the incident stuck with me. If Sam cared this much about vibes, maybe he shouldn't have chosen to live in a shared building. The second conflict came a week later, when I bought a small patio table and set it up on my side. It wasn't fancy, just a cheap metal thing with two folding chairs, but I was proud of it. The next day, I found a note taped to my door in looping, delicate handwriting. Hey, just a heads up. Your table's reflecting light into my bedroom window in the morning. Any chance you could angle it differently? I stared at the note for a full minute, oscillating between disbelief and fury. Reflecting light? Was he serious? It wasn't like I'd set up a disco ball. Still, I didn't want to escalate things, so I moved the table closer to the grill and called it a day. Then came the bamboo incident. One morning, I woke up to find a cluster of potted bamboo stalks on my side of the terrace. They were lined up in a neat row, forming a leafy wall that cut off part of the view. I knocked on Sam's door. "Hey," I said when he answered, still wearing pajama pants. "What's with the bamboo?" He yawned, barely awake. "It's for privacy," he said. Like that explained everything. Privacy from what? There's literally no one else around. "You had people over last week," he said, scratching his head. It felt exposed. I bit my tongue, trying to keep my cool. "Okay, but you put them on my side." "It's just a few plants," he said, his tone breezy. "They'll thrive better there. More light." The gall. The absolute gall. I spent the next 10 minutes lugging the bamboo back onto his side of the terrace, slamming them down harder than necessary. Sam didn't say anything, but I noticed later that one of his succulents had mysteriously migrated onto my grill. From there, it was a slow descent into rooftop warfare. He started sweeping leaves from his plants onto my side, leaving piles of debris near my chair. In retaliation, I began moving his planters an inch closer to his door every morning, just enough to make him wonder if he was imagining it. He retaliated by hanging wind chimes that clinked incessantly in the breeze, driving me mad when I tried to relax with a book. I got back at him by hosting another rooftop gathering, this time with a Bluetooth speaker blasting 80s pop hits. The final straw came when I decided to buy a small fire pit. It was one of those portable ones, the kind that runs on propane, perfectly safe for a terrace. I set it up one evening, lit it, and sat back to admire my handiwork. 10 minutes later, Sam burst onto the roof. "Are you trying to burn the whole building down?" he yelled, his face a mixture of anger and panic. "It's a fire pit," I said, gesturing to the tiny flame, completely contained. "Chill out." Sam didn't chill out. He launched into a tirade about fire hazards, air pollution, and how the smoke was probably killing his rosemary. I snapped back, pointing out his clutter of plants and how they were encroaching on my side again. Things escalated quickly. At one point, I may have called him a plant tyrant, and he might have accused me of being a suburbanite pretending to love city life. Now the terrace is a disaster. Sam moved the bamboo back, this time with a row of cactus pots as reinforcements. I shoved my table against the divider, which bent slightly under the pressure. The herb garden is wilting. My grill is covered in soil from a knocked-over planter, and the string lights are hanging at an awkward angle because someone, not me, unhooked one of the supports. The landlord emailed us yesterday, asking what the hell happened to the terrace he described as a peaceful urban retreat. I don't even know how to respond. "So, AITA?" It began as a simple idea, a late-night brainstorm inspired by nothing more than a passing thought. My roommate Kevin had been in a slump for months. He was always the life of the party, the guy with the loudest laugh and the wildest ideas. But after his longtime girlfriend dumped him and he got passed over for a big promotion at work in the same week, he turned into a ghost of himself. The apartment was eerily quiet. No more bad karaoke renditions of Bohemian Rhapsody at midnight. No more half-baked schemes to make quick cash. Just Kevin, sitting on the couch, staring at some Netflix show he wasn't even watching. That's when I decided to fix it, not just to lift his spirits, but to reignite that spark. Kevin was obsessed with escape rooms. He used to drag me and our friends to one almost every month. He'd always take charge, piecing together puzzles with a Sherlock Holmes intensity while we fumbled with locks or held the flashlight. The last one we did was just before everything went downhill, and I remembered how alive he'd been that day. So, I thought, why not bring the escape room to him? It started small. I planned to transform our apartment into a full-scale, immersive escape room experience. I wanted it to be personal, something that reflected Kevin's quirks and interests. He loved history, so I settled on a theme, a treasure hunt in a 1920s speakeasy. Over the next few weeks, I scoured thrift stores for props, antique-looking keys, fake jewels, old-timey glasses, and a typewriter I managed to snag for $10. I learned how to make aged paper for the clues and even recruited a couple of our friends to play characters, complete with costumes and backstories. I worked on the puzzles for hours every night after Kevin went to bed. The centerpiece was a fake ledger, where Kevin had to decode secret messages to find the combination to a safe. I even built a fake wall in his bedroom closet to hide the treasure, which was just a vintage flask filled with his favorite whiskey and a heartfelt note that read, "You still got it." The day of the surprise, I convinced him to go out for coffee while we set up. Our friends arrived, and we transformed the apartment into a dimly lit speakeasy, complete with jazz music, scattered props, and a secret knock for the front door. When Kevin came back, I greeted him with a fedora and a slip of paper that read, "Detective, the mob's after you. You've got 1 hour to find the stolen treasure before they come knocking." For the first time in months, I saw his eyes light up. "Are you serious?" he said, grinning. "Dead serious," I replied, dropping into my best noir voice. "Now get to work, detective." At first, it was perfect. Kevin dove in, solving the first couple of puzzles like a pro. He interrogated our friends, who stayed in character so convincingly that I almost forgot they weren't real gangsters, and followed every clue with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen in ages. He even cracked a joke when he got stumped on a particularly tricky cipher, saying, "Guess the mob's gonna get me after all. Tell my mom I loved her." But then, about halfway through, something changed. He found a photo I'd hidden among the props, a picture of him and his ex. It was supposed to be part of the story, a clue linking her character to the treasure, but as soon as he picked it up, his face fell. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it down like it burned his hand. "Seriously?" he said, his tone sharp. "What?" I asked, startled. "You used her as part of this?" He gestured to the photo. "What were you thinking?" "It's just a prop," I said quickly. "I thought it would make the story more." "More what? Real? Personal?" He shook his head, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea how messed up that is?" "It's not like that," I tried to explain. "I was just trying to..." "To what? Remind me of her? Make me feel like a failure all over again?" He threw the photo onto the table, his hands clenching into fists. "This was supposed to be fun. Now it's just... I don't even know what this is." I stood there, stunned, as he started pacing. Our friends exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to stay in character or leave entirely. The jazz music suddenly felt too loud, too bright, like it was mocking the moment. "Kevin, I swear, I didn't mean to upset you," I said, my voice trembling. "I thought this would." "You thought," he interrupted, turning to face me. "That's the problem. You thought this was a game, but it's my life." His words hit me like a gut punch. I hadn't seen it that way. I'd been so caught up in creating something cool and elaborate that I hadn't considered how it might actually feel for him. He grabbed his coat and left without another word. The rest of us stood there in silence, the treasure still hidden behind the fake wall, the whiskey undrunk. The room felt empty in a way it hadn't in weeks. I haven't spoken to Kevin much since then. He's civil, but distant, like he's keeping me at arm's length. I keep wondering if I should have done something simpler, less ambitious. But how could I have known it would hit him so hard? I was just trying to help. When my cousin Leah announced she was finally moving back to the city after years of working overseas, I knew her welcome home surprise had to be epic. Not just cake and balloons epic, but the kind of thing people talk about for years. A reverse scavenger hunt, I declared to my best friend, Sam, over a plate of fries at our favorite diner. Sam, predictably, looked unimpressed. "What's a reverse scavenger hunt?" "Instead of hunting for things, the clues lead people to her," I explained, sketching wildly on a napkin. "At each stop, they'll find a piece of her life, like photos, mementos, memories, and then, at the end, they all meet her at a final destination. Big reveal, lots of hugs, maybe some tears." Sam dunked a fry in ketchup, staring at me like I just proposed skydiving without parachutes. "Or," he said slowly, "we could throw a dinner party. Something simple. You know, like normal humans." I groaned. "Dinner parties are boring." Leah's not boring. She spent 2 years in Cairo working for an NGO and another year backpacking through Patagonia. A dinner party won't even scratch the surface of who she is. "And a scavenger hunt will?" Sam shot back. What, are you planning to leave her passport in a parking lot for people to find? I glared at him. It's symbolic. It'll show everyone the journey she's been on. Right? Because nothing says, welcome back, like forcing her friends and family to play Pokemon Go, but with her personal effects. You're impossible, I snapped, snatching the napkin away. Sam leaned back in the booth, smirking. I'm just saying, not everyone needs theatrics. Maybe she prefers something chill, like a small dinner with her closest people. Chill is overrated, I muttered, but his words stuck with me. Planning the scavenger hunt took over my life for the next 2 weeks. I mapped out the stops meticulously. The cafe where we used to hang out as teenagers, the library where she practically lived during grad school, the park where she kissed her first boyfriend. Each location would have a little gift, a handwritten note, a photo, maybe even one of her favorite snacks. By the time her friends and family reached the final stop, a rooftop bar downtown, Leah would be waiting to greet them, surrounded by string lights and champagne. It was perfect. In theory. The morning of the event, Sam showed up at my apartment, coffee in hand and skepticism in his eyes. So, how many people are actually doing this thing? All of them, I said, defensive. Everyone's excited. And by everyone, you mean? Her mom, her sister, 3 of her college friends, 2 co-workers, and that guy she dated briefly who still likes all her Instagram posts. Sam raised an eyebrow. 8 people? It's about quality, not quantity. Sam didn't argue, but I could feel his doubt hovering over me like a storm cloud. I shoved the scavenger hunt maps at him and said, "Here, you're helping." The first stop went smoothly. Leah's mom teared up when she found the old photo of Leah in her soccer uniform taped to the cafe window. At the library, her college friend Kat practically squealed when she discovered the bookmark Leah had made her years ago tucked into a random book. By the time we hit the park, people were buzzing with excitement. And then it all fell apart. The fourth stop, an art gallery, was supposed to feature a tiny watercolor painting Leah had done during a summer art class. But when the group arrived, the gallery was locked. I called the manager, who sheepishly admitted he'd forgotten to leave the painting outside like we'd planned. Cue panic. "I can break the lock," Sam offered, looking way too eager. "Absolutely not," I hissed, frantically trying to come up with a solution. "We'll skip this one." "But the clue leads here," Leah's sister pointed out. "What if it ruins the flow?" "It won't," I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "The next stop is the rooftop. It's the big finale anyway." The group grudgingly agreed, though the vibe had shifted from excited anticipation to mild confusion. Sam, of course, couldn't resist a dig as we walked to the final stop. Nothing like an elaborate scavenger hunt to remind people that things don't always go as planned, he said, grinning. "Do you want me to strangle you in front of Leah's mom?" I shot back. When we arrived at the rooftop bar, Leah was there, just as planned. Her face lit up when she saw everyone, and for a brief, glorious moment, I thought I'd pulled it off. Then the sprinklers went off. 1 minute we were toasting with champagne, and the next, we were drenched. People screamed, the bartender swore, and Leah laughed so hard she nearly fell over. Sam grabbed a cocktail umbrella and held it over his head like it would save him. "I told you we should have done a dinner party," he yelled over the chaos. Despite the waterlogged ending, the night wasn't a total disaster. Leah hugged me tight before she left, her eyes sparkling. "Only you could come up with something this insane," she said. "Thank you." Later, Sam and I sat in my apartment, drying off with mismatched towels. "So," he said, smirking, "was it everything you dreamed of?" I threw a soggy napkin at him. "Shut up." But as I replayed the day in my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he'd been right. Maybe Leah would have been just as happy, maybe happier, with something simpler. It started with a pair of antique chairs. My mom called them a family treasure. I called them one creak away from collapse. They had sat in her dining room for as long as I could remember, 2 rickety, high-backed relics that no one dared actually use because they looked more decorative than functional. When she moved into a smaller place last year, she insisted I take them. "Just for safekeeping," she'd said with a smile that dared me to refuse. "I don't trust the movers not to damage them, And you have the space. Did I have the space? Barely. But refusing my mother, Diane, queen of sentimental artifacts, was like trying to argue with gravity. So, the chairs came to live in my already cramped apartment. They were wedged awkwardly against the wall in the living room, where they served no purpose except to give me anxiety every time I brushed too close, afraid I'd knock one over. A few months later, the real trouble started. Mom was visiting for the weekend, a rare occurrence now that she lived 2 hours away, and I was doing my best to make everything perfect. Snacks she liked, a fresh candle that smelled like lavender, her favorite show queued up on the TV. But of course, the chairs were her main focus. "You haven't been using them," she observed, frowning as she ran a hand over one's intricately carved armrest. "I mean, not really," I admitted. "They're not exactly practical for, like, sitting," she gasped, as though I'd suggested burning them for firewood. "They're heritage, Alex. They're meant to be preserved. You do understand how much these chairs mean to our family, don't you?" I wanted to say, "No, actually, I don't. They're just furniture." But I bit my tongue and nodded. Diane didn't do well with bluntness. "Good," she said, her frown softening, "because I've been thinking. There's no sense in them just sitting here gathering dust. I'd like to take them back." Relief flooded me. Finally, the chairs would go home to someone who cared. But, of course, there was a catch. "I don't have the space in my current place," she continued, "so I want you to bring them to your Uncle Ray's house. He has the perfect spot for them in his dining room." "Uncle Ray? The guy who lives 4 hours away?" "He's family," Mom said, as though that explained everything. "I'm sure he'll be thrilled. It's the least you can do." I wanted to laugh, or scream. Instead, I said, "Mom, I don't think I have time to drive 4 hours to deliver chairs to Uncle Ray." Her expression hardened, that subtle shift that signaled I was dangerously close to being labeled ungrateful. "It's not like I'm asking you to move a piano, Alex. These chairs are important to me. To us. I would do it myself, but you don't have the space," I finished for her, already regretting my tone. "Exactly," she said. "So, you'll do it?" I opened my mouth to protest again, but the words tangled in my throat. I thought of all the times she'd helped me, watching my dog when I was out of town, bailing me out with rent when I was between jobs. What was a little inconvenience compared to that? "Fine," I said finally. "I'll take the chairs to Uncle Ray's." That was last weekend. Yesterday, I called Uncle Ray to coordinate the drop-off. He sounded confused at first, then amused. "Diane and her chairs," he said with a chuckle. "Yeah, I don't have room for them, but if she wants me to hold on to them temporarily, I guess I can put them in the garage." The garage. My stomach twisted. This wasn't about heritage. Mom didn't even have a real plan for the chairs. She just didn't want to deal with them herself, and had roped me into her elaborate game of heirloom hot potato. I texted her immediately, "Hey, just talk to Uncle Ray. He doesn't have space for the chairs either. Maybe we should figure out a different plan?" Her response came quickly, "Alex, this isn't about convenience. It's about responsibility. You said you'd handle it." That night, I stared at the chairs, feeling the weight of their presence more than ever. They weren't just furniture. They were symbols of every moment I'd let Mom guilt me into doing something I didn't want to do. They were her way of testing how far I'd go to keep the peace. And for once, I wasn't sure I wanted to play along. So, here's the thing. The chairs are still in my living room. I haven't told Mom I didn't make the trip to Uncle Ray's. I don't know if I will. Part of me feels like I'm being petty, like I should just suck it up and deliver them already. But another part of me wonders if letting her believe I'll always say yes is just setting myself up for a lifetime of antique chairs and everything they represent. So, AITA? It all started because of a typo. I work for a tech company, and part of my job is running team-wide meetings. You know, those engagement-building exercises where everyone pretends to care while secretly checking Slack under the table. Last Tuesday, I sent out the agenda for our weekly meeting, but instead of typing Team Synergy Presentation, autocorrect turned it into Team Surgery Presentation. Harmless, right? Not to Kevin. Kevin is that guy who takes every opportunity to yes and his way through life. He's the reason our office break room has a dartboard made of sticky notes and why the company fridge once had a sign that said, "Please refrain from storing live chickens." So, naturally, when Kevin saw my typo, he decided it was an invitation. I didn't know what he was planning until I walked into the conference room that afternoon. Kevin had transformed it into a makeshift operating theater. He'd borrowed a lab coat from someone's desk, taped gloves to his sleeves like he was scrubbing in, and somehow procured a skeleton model, which he laid out on the table under a spotlight. Above it was a hand-drawn banner that read, "Team Surgery," a cut above the rest. I laughed. The room laughed. Even the VP chuckled, which is saying something because the man has the emotional range of a paperclip. It was all in good fun, until Kevin picked up a scalpel. Not a real one, thank God. It was one of those cheap Halloween props, but still. "Let's dissect our synergy issues," he shouted, jabbing at the skeleton's ribs. I thought it was hilarious. The VP? Not so much. He left the room looking like he'd just witnessed a war crime. Kevin got a slap on the wrist, but he didn't care. He leaned over to me after the meeting and whispered, "That was just the warm-up." I should have taken that as a warning. The next morning, I walked into my office to find a trail of bloody footprints leading from the door to my desk. Not real blood, obviously. It was ketchup, but the smell hit me like a truck. On my desk was a note written in barbecue sauce. "We need to talk about your patient, Kevin." My coworkers lost it when they saw the mess. I, on the other hand, spent 20 minutes scrubbing condiments off my desk and chair. But Kevin wasn't getting away with this. That night, I stopped by the hardware store and bought a dozen rubber snakes. Then I snuck into the office early the next morning and hid them around Kevin's workspace, one coiled under his keyboard, another peeking out of his desk drawer, and the piece de resistance. Giant one curled around the handle of his coffee mug. When Kevin walked in, he screamed. Screamed. People came running from down the hall. "Who did this?" he yelled, holding up the mug's snake like it was evidence in a trial. I shrugged. All innocence. "Looks like someone's shedding old habits," I said, biting back a grin. That should have been the end of it. But Kevin took it nuclear. I showed up to work the next day to find my office chair replaced with a full-sized medical gurney, complete with restraints and a dangling 4-bag labeled caffeine drip. The rest of my desk was covered in gauze, and my monitor displayed a looping PowerPoint that said, "Patient, Team Dynamics, Diagnosis, Critical." I couldn't let this stand. Over the weekend, I called in a favor from my cousin, who works in prop design. On Monday morning, Kevin arrived to find his cubicle completely transformed into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I'd hung fake vines from the ceiling, scattered dirt and rubble. Okay, it was shredded paper and foam rocks, and set up a small fog machine that puffed dramatically whenever someone walked by. His desk was covered in medical charts labeled Patient Zero, and a sign that read, "The epidemic of terrible pranks ends here." It was a masterpiece. The whole office thought so, too. But Kevin wasn't laughing anymore. He stood there, staring at the destruction, and said, "You've made a grave mistake." Then he walked out, leaving behind the foggy ruins of his cubicle. I thought he was bluffing. I was wrong. That night, my phone buzzed with an email from Kevin. The subject line, "Patient report attached." The attachment was a photo of me sitting at my desk, looking confused. I stared at it, trying to figure out when he'd taken it. Then I saw the timestamp, 9:32 a.m. today, except I'd arrived at the office at 9:45. That's when I realized Kevin had set up a dummy me. The next morning, I found it, an eerie, life-sized mannequin wearing my exact outfit from the day before, slumped in my chair. It even had a coffee cup with my name on it. Kevin had apparently spent weeks building it, just waiting for the right moment to unleash his masterstroke. I had to admit, it was brilliant, also deeply unsettling. I knew I had to end this once and for all. So, I made a call to the janitorial staff, borrowed a rolling cart, and placed the mannequin on it, arms outstretched like a victim of a dramatic medical failure. I rolled it into Kevin's cubicle while everyone watched, then loudly proclaimed, "Dr. Kevin, your patient didn't make it." The office erupted in laughter. Even Kevin had to admit it was a solid move. We called a truce that day, or at least, we pretended to. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the mannequin. about how Kevin knew my exact outfit, about how there's always one rubber snake that I can't seem to find. And sometimes, when I'm alone at my desk, I swear I hear the faint hiss of fog in the distance. So, Reddit, AITA? We were arguing about a bed. Not just any bed, a smart bed, as Luke called it. A sleek, tech-infused monstrosity that adjusted firmness, tracked sleep patterns, and even had a built-in cooling system for optimal temperature regulation. Basically, it was a mattress trying to be a personal assistant, and it cost nearly as much as my first car. Just imagine, Luke said, his hands spread wide like he was unveiling a miracle. No more tossing and turning. No more back pain. This thing is a game changer. I crossed my arms, unimpressed. Or we could just, I don't know, buy a decent mattress that doesn't require a software update. Luke gave me a look like I just suggested sleeping on a pile of hay. You don't get it. This isn't just a bed, it's an experience. It learns how you sleep and adjusts in real time. It's basically a relationship therapist for your body. I snorted. Pretty sure my body needs a chiropractor, not a therapist. He ignored me and kept scrolling through the product page on his tablet. Look, it's on sale. We'd be stupid not to get it. It's on sale for $3,000, I pointed out. And what if the tech breaks? Are we supposed to call Geek Squad to fix our bed? You don't trust anything with technology, Luke shot back. You still refuse to use the voice commands in your car. That's because the last time I did, it thought I was asking to call my ex. I snapped. Anyway, this isn't about tech, it's about practicality. We need a new bed, not a spaceship. Luke sighed, exasperated. And this is why our backs hurt all the time. We always go cheap. When are we going to stop settling for good enough and actually invest in ourselves? That one landed, because he wasn't entirely wrong. Our current mattress was a sad relic from my first apartment, a lumpy, sagging disaster that made ominous squeaking noises whenever we moved. Replacing it wasn't optional, it was a matter of survival. But Luke's idea of investing and mine were miles apart. He saw the smart bed as a solution to all our problems. I saw it as a ridiculous splurge that would haunt my bank account for years. The argument escalated from there. I accused him of always going overboard, of chasing shiny new things without thinking about the cost. He accused me of being stuck in a scarcity mindset, of always choosing the cheapest option even when it wasn't the best. You don't value comfort, he said at one point, throwing up his hands. You just want everything to be functional and boring. Because we can't afford to value comfort. I shot back. Not when we have actual bills to pay. And this is why we never have nice things, he muttered, more to himself than to me. The silence that followed was loud and painful. It wasn't the first time we butted heads over money, but this felt different, deeper. Like we weren't just arguing about a bed. We were arguing about what kind of life we wanted to build together. For the next few days, we danced around the issue. Luke kept sending me links to articles about the benefits of smart beds, while I retaliated with spreadsheets outlining our monthly expenses. We were at an impasse, each too stubborn to give an inch. But the tension was exhausting, and by the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the living room, scrolling through his phone with the defeated look of someone trying to distract himself from being mad. I sat down next to him, the silence stretching between us like a wall. "Hey," I said finally, "can we talk?" He glanced at me, wary. "About what?" "The bed," I said, bracing myself. "And everything else." He sighed, setting his phone aside. "What's there to talk about? You've made it pretty clear how you feel." "Yeah, but I haven't really listened to how you feel," I admitted, my voice softer now. "And I think I should." Luke raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. But then he started talking, and once he started, he couldn't stop. He told me how much he hated waking up sore every morning, how he felt like he was never fully rested, how he wanted our home to feel like a sanctuary, not just a place we survived in. And yeah, maybe the smart bed was a little over the top, but to him, it wasn't just a mattress, it was an investment in making life better. "And you know what?" he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "I feel like I'm always asking for permission to want things. Like I have to justify everything, or you'll just say no." That one hit me in the gut. I hadn't realized how much my practicality felt like rejection to him, how it made him feel small, like his dreams didn't matter. "I don't want you to feel like that," I said quietly, "but I also don't want to feel like I'm the only one worrying about the future, about what happens if something goes wrong." Luke nodded, his expression softening. "I get that. I do. But I don't want to spend my whole life waiting for the perfect time to be comfortable, you know?" We sat there for a long time, both of us trying to untangle the mess of emotions and fears that had led us here. Eventually, we came up with a compromise. We'd buy a high-quality mattress, not the spaceship, but something better than our current disaster. And we'd set aside a separate fund for other upgrades in the future. No impulsive decisions, no all-or-nothing ultimatums. Just balance. The new mattress was delivered last week, and so far, it's been a game-changer. It's not as flashy as the smart bed, but it's comfortable, solid, and every time I lie down on it, I feel a little bit of the tension between us melting away. Still, I can't help but wonder, AITA for resisting the smart bed? Or was Luke being unreasonable? Or maybe this was never really about the bed at all. Just two people trying to figure out how to build a life together without losing themselves in the process. The night I met the stranger, I was supposed to be at a concert. I had tickets, a plan, and a friend who bailed last minute with a vague excuse about bad vibes. I should have just stayed home, but something in me, call it pride, call it stubbornness, dragged me out the door anyway. Alone and irritated, I ended up at the wrong subway station, miles from the venue. The train schedules flickered on the ancient screens above, and I realized the next ride was over an hour away. That's when I noticed the vending machine. It wasn't your standard machine, though it tried to look like one. The black metal casing was scuffed, and its dim bulbs flickered like an old horror movie prop. Instead of snacks and sodas, the rows were filled with strange items. A single red shoelace, an old Polaroid camera, a chess piece carved from bone, and dozens of other oddities. Each was labeled with a price, but not in money, a secret, an hour of sleep, your favorite memory. I laughed, assuming it was some art installation, until the man appeared. He came from nowhere, stepping into view like he'd been part of the shadows. His coat was too long, brushing the grimy subway floor, and his face was sharp in a way that made you feel like he could cut through you with a glance. His eyes, though, that's what I couldn't look away from. They were silver. Not gray, not light blue, silver, like molten metal, swirling and alive. "Having trouble deciding?" he asked. "I'm not buying anything," I said quickly, stepping back. He smiled, slow and unsettling. "Oh, you already did." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He gestured to the machine, and to my horror, my reflection stared back from the cracked glass. But it wasn't me as I was. It was me with hollowed eyes, my hair streaked gray, and my expression slack and lifeless. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Everything is possible," the stranger said, his voice like smoke curling in the air. "The question is, what's worth the price?" I shook my head, my mouth dry. "I didn't. This is some kind of trick." He chuckled, a sound that crawled under my skin. "If it's a trick, then why are you scared?" I wanted to leave, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My gaze was locked on the machine, and without meaning to, I leaned closer. One of the items caught my eye, a small, silver locket engraved with an intricate pattern. It was beautiful, delicate, and impossible to ignore. I didn't know why I wanted it. I just did. "What's the price?" I asked before I could stop myself. "A memory," the stranger said. "Which one?" He tilted his head. "That's for you to decide." The smart thing would have been to walk away, but there was something about the locket, something that whispered promises of forgotten truths and hidden doors. I reached for it. "Careful," the stranger said softly. Ignoring him, I slid a coin into the slot. Not a real coin, but a token I didn't recognize, pulled from my pocket as though it had always been there. The machine groaned, shuddering as if it were alive, and the locket fell into the tray below. I picked it up, and the world shifted. Suddenly, I was 8 years old, standing on the edge of a creek near my childhood home. The sun was warm, the air smelled of moss and water, and my younger self was crouched by the bank, holding something shiny. A coin, tarnished and ancient. "Don't lose it," a voice behind me said. I turned to see my grandmother, her face kind but serious. "It's older than you can imagine and more valuable than gold." Then the memory dissolved. I was back in the subway station, clutching the locket. But something was missing. Not the locket. It was still there, solid and cold in my hand. No, it was the memory. I couldn't recall my grandmother's face anymore, or the way her voice sounded when she told me stories before bed. "You've lost the thread," the stranger said, his silver eyes glinting. "What did you do?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I didn't do anything. You chose." The words hit like a punch, and I stumbled backward, dropping the locket. It landed with a metallic clink, but when I looked down, it was gone. The machine whirred, its display flickering, and a new item appeared in its place, a cracked pocket watch. The label read, "A fragment of time." I looked back at the stranger, but he was gone. I didn't wait for the train that night. I walked home in the dark, my thoughts spiraling. The locket, the memory, the machine. It all felt like a fever dream, except for the hollow ache in my chest where my grandmother's face used to be. I didn't sleep, and the next day, I went back. The subway station was the same, but the vending machine wasn't there. The corner where it had stood was empty, as though it had never existed. But I knew better, because sometimes, late at night, I still feel the weight of the locket in my hand, and in the distance, faint and echoing, I hear the hum of the machine, waiting for its next buyer. Golden, glittering tickets to a murder mystery weekend at an old Victorian mansion. A Christmas gift from Lucas, presented with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for winning lottery numbers. "Look at this," he said, handing them to me like they were made of solid gold. A whole weekend of solving puzzles, secret identities, and period costumes. "It's going to be amazing." I looked down at the tickets, then up at him, then back at the tickets. "You realize I hate role-playing, right?" He waved me off. "Oh, come on. You don't hate it. You're just too stubborn to admit how fun it is." "No," I said slowly. "I hate it. Remember game night at Molly's? When I had to be the pirate captain and you kept telling me to commit to the accent? I wanted to throttle you with the eye patch." Lucas grinned, undeterred. "This is different. It's immersive. You'll love it. Why didn't you just get tickets to a regular spa weekend? I would have loved that." "That's boring," he said. "This is exciting. You'll thank me later." And just like that, I was roped into spending an entire weekend pretending to be someone I wasn't, in a house full of strangers who, I suspected, took this kind of thing far too seriously. The moment we arrived at the mansion, my worst fears were confirmed. Guests were already wandering around in character, dressed to the nines in corsets, pocket watches, and fake monocles. A man wearing a top hat and an absolutely ridiculous mustache approached us the second we stepped out of the car. "Ah, Lord and Lady Blackwood," he boomed, bowing low. "What an honor to have you join us for the weekend." "Thanks," I muttered, dragging my suitcase up the steps while Lucas eagerly introduced himself as Lord Blackwood, the world-renowned explorer. He was already in deep. I rolled my eyes so hard I saw stars. Dinner that night was a disaster. I'd barely sat down before Lucas nudged me with his elbow. "Introduce yourself," he hissed. I scrambled for the name on the character card they'd handed me. "Lady Evelyn Blackwood, wife of him." I waved vaguely at Lucas. "And what is your role in the household, Lady Blackwood?" asked a woman in an elaborate emerald gown who clearly had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. I don't know. Reading books? Drinking tea?" Lucas groaned under his breath, and the emerald lady looked scandalized. Meanwhile, I shoveled potatoes onto my plate and tried to block out Lucas's whispered instructions about playing along. When dinner was over, the murder was announced, and the mystery officially began. Everyone sprang into action like they'd been training for this moment their whole lives. Meanwhile, I tried to slip upstairs unnoticed. "Where are you going?" Lucas caught me on the staircase, his fake British accent firmly in place. "We have clues to find." "I'm going to bed." "What? You can't go to bed. We're Lord and Lady Blackwood. We have a reputation to uphold." Lucas, I said flatly. I don't care if we're the bloody king and queen of England. I'm not spending the next 2 hours pretending to interrogate someone named Countess Hargrove. His face fell, and for a moment, I thought he'd let it go. But then he did something that flipped a switch in me. He leaned in, smirking, and said, "You're being a wet blanket. This is why you don't get invited to game night anymore." Oh no, absolutely not. I was going to make Lucas regret those words. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed my character card, and started plotting my revenge. If he wanted me to commit to the role, I'd commit, but on my terms. At breakfast, I made my entrance with all the grace of a wrecking ball. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced loudly, clinking my teacup, "I have a confession." Everyone froze, forks suspended mid-air. Lucas looked up from his eggs, alarmed. "I killed Sir Reginald," I said dramatically, clutching my pearls. "He insulted my knitting, and I simply couldn't bear it." The room burst into murmurs of confusion. Lucas, red-faced, hissed, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to confess." "But darling," I said, patting his hand with mock concern, "you told me to commit." For the rest of the day, I turned Lady Evelyn Blackwood into the most chaotic murder suspect imaginable. I accused the butler of being a vampire. I claimed to have an affair with the groundskeeper, a character no one had actually mentioned but whom I insisted existed. At one point, I dramatically fainted in the parlor for no reason other than to disrupt the investigation. By dinner, the rest of the guests were torn between outrage and amusement. Lucas, on the other hand, was livid. "You're ruining the game," he hissed as I serenaded the table with a sea shanty about poisoned crumpets. "I'm enhancing the game," I shot back, winking at the Emerald Lady, who had started quietly giggling behind her fan. When the final reveal came, and the real murderer turned out to be Baron Pembroke, a kindly older gentleman who looked genuinely heartbroken about his fictional crime, I stood up and clapped. "Bravo!" I exclaimed. I knew it wasn't me all along. Lucas didn't talk to me the whole drive home. When we finally got back to our apartment, he exploded. "You embarrassed me. Everyone thought you were a lunatic." "Oh, come on," I said, tossing my bag onto the couch. "I was just trying to make it more fun." "It wasn't fun. It was sabotage," says the guy who forced me to go in the first place. "It was a gift. A gift you wanted." We went to bed in separate rooms that night, both convinced we were in the right. I know I was petty, but honestly, watching Lucas squirm every time I threw a wrench into his perfect murder mystery was worth every awkward car ride and silent treatment. It was one of those mornings where everything felt just slightly off. My coffee had been too bitter, the air too humid, and the traffic too relentless. The kind of day where you can't quite put your finger on why you're irritated, but it clings to you like static. I was coasting down the freeway, my focus narrowing on the upcoming exit. 3 more exits and I'd be in the parking lot at work, counting the seconds until lunch. That's when the silver Honda cut in front of me. It was sudden, not aggressive, exactly, but enough to force me to tap the brakes and mutter a curse under my breath. The driver wasn't exactly in a hurry. They just drifted in like it was their God-given right to block my path. My irritation bubbled over as I sped up slightly, my hand instinctively reaching toward the horn. Then, the driver waved. Not a sheepish sorry for that wave. No, this was exuberant, borderline chaotic. The kind of wave reserved for old friends reuniting after years apart. I squinted. That's when I saw her. Annie, my wife. She was beaming at me like she just stumbled across a stray puppy. Like the mere fact of my existence on the freeway was the most miraculous thing to ever happen. My brain did what it always does when confronted with sudden, unexpected affection. It stalled. I froze. I didn't wave back. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. My brain, still in commuter autopilot, couldn't make the leap from annoying driver to love of my life. By the time I processed what had happened, she was in my rearview mirror, her little Honda shrinking into the swarm of morning traffic. When I got to work, her text was waiting for me. "Sad you didn't wave back. Sad face." I stared at the screen, feeling a tug of guilt that I quickly rationalized away. Could have caused a crash, lol. "Love you." I typed back, then set my phone down like it was an argument settled. problem solved. Except it wasn't. That night, Annie's silence at dinner was louder than the words we weren't saying. She picked at her salad like it had personally offended her, her usual chatter reduced to single-syllable responses. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "All right, what's wrong?" I asked, already bracing myself for the answer. "You didn't wave," she said simply, not even looking up. "Annie, I was driving," I replied, exasperated. "I was focused on the road. You know, not dying." Her fork clattered against the plate. "It's not about the damn wave," she snapped, her voice sharp but trembling. "It's the fact that you saw me, and you didn't care. You didn't even smile. Do you know how stupid I felt, grinning and waving at you, while you just stared at me like I was a stranger?" Her words hit like a gut punch. I tried to defend myself, stammering out excuses about safety and timing, but they sounded hollow even to me. She wasn't asking for logic. She was asking for recognition, for connection, and I'd blown it. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just didn't know what to do." Her expression softened slightly, but the hurt lingered. "Sometimes I just need to know you see me," she said. "Not just as your wife, but as me. The person who's excited to see you, even on a crappy Tuesday morning in traffic." That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment in my head. The way her face had lit up when she waved. The way I'd let it pass by, too caught up in my own routine to meet her halfway. The next morning, I left early. I didn't tell her. I just drove, taking the long way to work, scanning every car on the freeway for a familiar silver Honda. When I finally spotted her, my heart jumped in a way that felt almost ridiculous. I pulled up beside her, honking twice. Annie glanced over, startled, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes, until recognition dawned. Her face lit up, and she rolled down her window. "Took you long enough," she shouted over the roar of traffic. "Sorry," I called back, grinning like an idiot. "I'm new at this whole romantic freeway gesture thing." She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that makes you forget about traffic and deadlines and bitter coffee. For a few fleeting moments, we drove side by side, honking and waving like teenagers in a road trip movie. When my exit came, I rolled down my window one last time. "Coffee later?" I shouted. "Only if you wave next time," she called back, her grin wide and mischievous. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop smiling. Because Annie was right. It wasn't about the wave. It was about showing up, even in the smallest, most unexpected moments. It was about seeing her, not just as my wife, but as the person who could turn a random Tuesday commute into something worth remembering.